Hi, I'm Brittany Faith, and welcome back to the Beyond Faith podcast. Today I have two very special guests with me. I have my sister and my mom. This weekend coming up is Mother's Day weekend, and we really wanted to celebrate all of the strong women in our life and to just honor them and see how their legacy pays way to us and what we do and how we serve. So if you stay here, we'll be talking about it some more. Well, like I said, I have two very special guests with me here today, my mom and my sister. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves?
I'm the mom, and my name is Samara Bianca Azevedo.
I'm Brianna Hope Azevedo.
Yep, and the three of us here were the women in our family, and it's something that's been very special because we've been learning what it means to work in ministry, because we haven't really had that example before this generation of women in ministry, because it all started even years ago with both of our grandmothers on both of our sides, on my dad's side and on my mom's side, who came to know Christianity and brought their family to Christianity. But now we're seeing how what they did all those years ago affects us today. For me not to talk too much, my mom's gonna say a little something.
Like Brittany was saying, I came from a background where my family wasn't Christian until my mother was the first one to accept Jesus as her Lord and Savior. And she's the one that actually paved the way so that I would know Christ today. And so that now we have a legacy where my children are being raised also in the gospel. And it all came from my mother. And when I look back, I'm very grateful because I know that it was hard at times. There's things that sometimes when I sit down with my siblings, we laugh about. But today I see that my mother was trying to actually teach us in the ways of the Lord, and she was hoping to establish the fear of God into our hearts and to love Him. I remember when we were children, my mom would sometimes take my brother and I into the room, and she would tell us that we were going to pray and that we had to bow our knees before going to sleep. And she would bow her knees at the foot of the bed, and we would bow our knees next to her. And I remember that my brother would look at me and we would start giggling, we were both looking at each other because we thought it was just silly. My sister, I think she was just a baby at the time, so she wasn't, she didn't have to come and bow next to us. But I remember while my mom would be praying with her eyes closed, we would sit there and make funny faces at each other, and we would start laughing. And sometimes my mom, in the middle of prayer, she would smack us for us to stay still because we were not taking serious that moment. And when we look back, we laugh. We're like, oh, mom was trying to smack us into being Christian. But it wasn't. Now I see that she was trying to teach us, that we should run to God, that we should present everything before God. We had a lot of family struggles at the time with my parents, and that was her trying to teach us that Jesus was the hope, that we needed to understand that He was the hope for the next generation. And talking about generation, I was actually reading about it a while back, and the Bible teaches us that God was a generational God. Even in the Bible, on various times, He says the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. He's showing us that He worries about generations. And I'm grateful that He does worry about generations, because since my mom accepted Christ, I had the opportunity of being taught in His ways and of meeting Christ. And because of that, I chose also to raise my children in the same fear of the Lord. I see that my mom was paving a way, and now, she was paving a way of us being Christian. And she used to dream about ministry. I remember she used to talk of anytime we would have a woman preacher or something come to our church, my mom would sit there and say, oh, one day I hope in my family that women preachers rise up in my family. To her, it was this wow factor. And I remember hearing her as a kid, and at the time I didn't even think much of it. But I was also not aware of the oppression and everything that women had gone through generations. Yeah. So now that I look back, I see like, wow, like she was dreaming big. She was dreaming big. It was something that wasn't normal until today. Sometimes a lot of denominations still
They don't recognize women preachers.
Don't recognize women in ministry, in leadership roles. So I look back and I was like, wow, she was actually, dreaming big and preparing like a mindset that, as women, we can also be used by God. Yeah. God also has a purpose for women in ministry. He has a special place in his heart for women in ministry. And I thought that was beautiful.
Yeah, and not to even get too controversial, but even in Jesus' ministry, he honored women. He had women that would walk with him, that were helping him, that were serving with him. Jesus always empowered women. And so it is nice to see how much we've come far when it comes to women in ministry, but there are still strides to be made. And my biggest example of this is growing up, and I would watch my mom in praise and worship, or I would watch my mom and dad when they first opened up the church. And I always had the example of a strong woman with her strong husband. It wasn't just the husband taking the lead all the time. It was them working together and creating and believing the dreams that God had for them together as a couple. That's another thing I wanted to see with you when it came time to when GE was being created. GE is our church, Chosen Generation, or Geração Eleita. How did that come about? Like, were you afraid? How did you take the step forward in accepting a call to ministry?
Oh, well, we were definitely afraid. I mean, we tried to, your father even thought about not running away from this calling because we knew that it implicated a lot. On various times, even throughout the years when things got tough, we would sometimes say, God, like, this is hard for us to handle. Like, our children are being placed also in a position that they never asked to be placed in, because it's not easy to be a pastoral family. The expectations and sometimes that people put on us, they're not expectations that we ever promised. We never promised to be perfect. We never promised that we would always get it right. We never promised that our kids weren't going to do mistakes, that we weren't going to do mistakes. So it's hard sometimes because people put this expectancy on a pastoral family that isn't real. We're just people like everyone else that has the desire to serve God and to live for God, but we're also figuring things out along the way, especially as first generation pastors, and first generation pastoral family.
Yeah.
So
no idea what we're doing sometimes.
Yeah.
And it is pretty to see how God genuinely, like, sometimes my mom, like, as she was saying, we don't even know if we're doing it fully right. But the desire to please God, to serve God, that's something that we all share.
Yeah.
It's something that as a family, we seek it daily. Like we're like, no, we want this. We want to keep fighting. And I know it comes back to having two strong role models.
Yeah. It definitely goes back to that.
Yeah.
Because we, on my side and on my husband's side, we had two
warriors.
moms that were fighting, to do God's will. And it's funny because their characteristics are completely different. They're two completely different kind of women. My mother was always a very quiet, on the quiet side, not confrontational woman. She seemed weak, maybe like physically, but she has this strength on the inside. Yep. And this, she knew the God that she had decided to serve. And my mother-in-law, on the contrary, she was a warrior. She was a fighter. She would stand her ground. But she also, her faith was also on God. But it's funny to see two different kinds of women, and God used them to reach their, their families.
They changed the course of the family
They
forever.
completely changed the course. Both of them were the first Christians, in our families. Yeah. Both of them, through them, they shared the gospel with their family members, and their family members came to Christ. through them, they were the kind of women that were kind of like, no, you're going to church, even when we didn't want to go to church. When I was a kid, sometimes I'd say, hey, I don't want to go. My mom's like, no, you're going. Like, that wasn't an option, And I know from the stories my husband shares, like that was never an option with his mother. And she was also alone taking her children. My father-in-law at the time still hadn't come to Christ. He was the only one in the household that hadn't come to Christ. And my mother-in-law made sure that her kids were going to church. They were in Sunday school, that they were getting the teachings that they needed. She was one of those strong women that made sure to get things done, especially with things that had to do with God. Like, she just did not compromise. And I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that he had that. I'm also grateful that through seeing his mother, he also recognizes women in ministry.
Yeah.
And he knows the importance of women in ministry. He's very grateful for everything that his mother did for him.
And he genuinely values what women bring to the table. Like the majority of the ministries in our church are women that are working and that are serving, and he values the importance that they bring to the table. Sometimes, like, we're reading this book. We just started a book club at church. There's more to come on that soon on future episodes. But in the book, it was talking about the value of being a kingdom woman and what it means to serve God in ministry and what God calls us. And it talks about how women have the power of influence because God created us to be what? Man's helper. And so inside of us, we influence whatever environment we're in, whether it's for the good or for the bad. And we could see here how these two women, my grandmothers, decided to influence their families for the better. They raised two pastors. They raised, my father, Pastor Junior, and my mom, who's also a pastor, to come together and then create a ministry, which is Chosen Generation, and raise 4 children in church. And this all started with 2 women that came to know the gospel.
Yeah.
And changed the course of the family forever.
Yeah, and by no way am I saying that they were perfect.
No.
And
No one's
that's
perfect.
the beauty of serving God, is that we're flawed, but he's flawless.
Yeah.
And in our struggles, like where we're weak, he is strong, and that's where we can actually place our strength, And even in ministry, us, like many times, like we don't know what we're doing. We're totally asking God to guide us, and sometimes it's literally like blind faith. Like we're sitting there and just God calls us into things, and we're terrified, and we're very strong personalities in our house. If you know our family, everybody is very opinionated. And it started off with 2 opinionated people bumping heads, and now we have 6 opinionated people in the house. We have some that are more flexible, others that not so much. They make sure that their voices are heard. And we see the characteristics going back to our mothers, with my mother and my mother-in-law. One was opinionated and would not back down. The other one was opinionated but stayed quiet. But we have all of this under one roof, and we see God at work.
Yeah. Do you have any tips for moms that want to raise kids that want to go to church? Because my parents, they never really forced us to be Christians. We were in church because that was just the normal. We would go to church every day. But then it came to a point even in my life where I'm going to share this testimony when my father comes on the podcast for Father's Day. But my father sat me down, him and my mom, and they told me, listen, while you live under our roof, you're going to go to church. But you don't have to serve if you don't want to. How do you feel like you can, other moms out there that are going to listen to your word, how do you raise children that want to work in ministry? How do you teach them to have that value and that desire? Because I know I'm curious, because one day I'm going to be a mom and I have no idea how you did it.
Yeah, I think there's no specific way of teaching. I think the best way that you teach is by setting an example. I think from the day you guys were born, several days, I'd get home from the hospital and we were right back in church with you guys. There was no, church was always a big part of our life. It's always been a big part of our life. We got to a point when we first started the church that we would get to church and the kids would rip off their shoes. And when we'd get home, they'd stay with their shoes on. So it just showed that we were spending more time in the church building than we were actually spending at home. But it's just something that was normal to you guys.
Yeah.
We made it something normal. That was normal to us. To us, it was normal to be at church. To us, it was normal, like you'd get to church, you look around, hey, what needs to be done? I need to fix a chair. I'm going to go fix the chair. I need to pick up toilet paper in the bathroom. Whatever needs to be done, we would do just like you do in your regular house. You get home, you look around, the pillows are messed up on the couch, you fix them. There's something that needs to be clean, you do it. And I think we just raised you guys with that same thing like at church. You get to church, and the church is also your home. It's also a part of who you are. And getting your kids to actually love the church is them seeing you love it. Like there's no other way. There's no specific teaching that you can give, but it's by setting example. When we first started the church, Brianna was like, I think about like 8 months old. Josiah was like a year and a half.
Yeah.
Brittany was 9 and Jeremy was 7 years old. And they would just sit there. We didn't have anybody else. We started the church. Your dad would take the guitar and he would lead praise, and I would be standing next to him singing as his back vocal, and we would do that, and then he would preach, and while we were on top we would look down and we would see where you guys were, and there would be one youth holding one baby, the other youth holding another one, or you guys holding your siblings, and if they fell asleep, you guys would lay them on a little blanket on the front of the...
She was really good from leading worship and keeping us in check.
Oh, I would give them the stink eye.
Major.
If they were
major.
Not.
She'd be like, oh, and then we're talking. I don't know. I'd look up. She'd look at me. I'm like, hallelujah.
Yeah.
Like, because we knew instantly, like, my mom, when she gave you that look, you knew.
You're
and
in
it
trouble.
really instilled reverence to the house of God.
Yeah.
It instilled knowing that there was a moment to talk to our friends, but right now was a moment to talk to God.
Yeah.
And a lot of times people are like, oh, what's it like when your parents are the pastors? Because they don't know what that's like. I don't know anything other than that, honestly.
Yeah. I don't think it's like we
not
were like
weird,
that
it's
because
normal.
we were the pastor, because we were already like that when we were serving at a different church where we had served under leadership. We were a part of praise and worship, and at that time we only had Brittany and Jeremy. And from praise and worship, they would both sit in their seats, and they would just look up at us. If anything, they were getting out of control, I would just give them the look. And they would once again stop what they were doing, stop playing, because they knew we would talk to you guys like beforehand. We would set the rules beforehand. We're like, hey, we're going to church. Praise and worship is a time when we're praising God, where we're giving to God. What's in our heart. Like when we're praying, you have to understand you're talking to God. Like we always tried to teach you guys in a language that you guys could also understand.
Yeah.
Like some people say, hey, we're praying, but what does praying really mean to a child that's like 2-3 years old? Like, I don't understand. And then we would try just, I guess, to explain to you guys, when mommy's talking to you, do you get up and walk away? Do you turn your face and ignore mommy? And you guys would say, no. And I said, well, when we're praying, we're talking to God. We can't just turn our face and walk away. Like, we're talking to him. We have to show him respect. And I think that was pretty much what it was. It's not like we didn't have like these major rules that we would put on top of you guys. You have to do this, you have to do that, or have little mini seminars with them at home. That did not happen. It was just pretty much that. Everything we tried to, influence you was either by example, or we were also really careful about what was speaking into your lives, what you guys watched on TV. They knew, like, there were certain things that I'd be like,
not allowed to watch.
You're not watching that. I don't like the message behind it. And sometimes even when they were growing, they would say, Mom, but what's the big deal? And I'd say, you know what? It's not like that it's a big deal when you look at it. Like, I was like, but you guys are my greatest treasure. I'm like, and since you're my greatest treasure, a treasure you have to take care of and you have to guard it. I'm like, so in doubt, I'd rather not let you watch it.
Yeah.
I remember saying that to you guys. In doubt, I'd rather not let you watch it. you know?
Yeah, it's important even what she's saying right now, where it's to the moms. Obviously, I'm not a mom. I only have the example of my mom here with me.
And to
It
the
is
dads,
important what is pouring into your kids and what are you pouring into your kids, because just telling them to go to church is not enough. If you don't love going to church, they're not going to love going to church. If they don't see you serving in ministry, they're not going to serve in ministry. Everything really is by example. And God is faithful. Like, you might think that no one is seeing the long hours you work, that no one says thank you, no one is seeing your efforts. But God sees every effort that you make. He sees the tears that you cry when you feel like you're being rejected, you're being hurt, you're the thankless, because being a mom really is like a thankless job where you don't get paid and you're never off the clock. But God honors you in every single moment. He knows the kind of woman he created. And it's something beautiful to be a woman. And that really what is the dream is, to be able to work here and to see the beauty and the strength that comes through womanhood. And one thing that I love that I had the example was from my mom.
Yeah. One thing that I wish that someone had told me about was it's the one thing that people normally never talk about, but it's the seasons of motherhood. Because that's tough. Yeah. Like, if you're somebody that's always like been involved in ministry, the seasons of motherhood, sometimes they come with challenges that you weren't ready for. I was, since, my youth years, I was always very used to being active in church.
And she became a mom
with praise and worship, with everything. I got married early, and then I had children early. So to me, I think the hardest part was having sometimes to back up from the things that I was doing in ministry and respecting that season of life that God had placed me in. Because our life is like, we go through seasons. Yeah. But to me, it was tough because I remember when I had these like 4 little kids and there was no kid class. And I would go to church and sometimes I would have to step out during the message. And in the church building where we were at the time, they were newborns. And I would step into the kitchen and I could hear the message that was happening in the sanctuary. But I would just cry. The whole time I would sit there crying because I felt like I'm failing. I was like, I am failing God. I can't work for him the way I used to work for him. I had to step out of praise and worship because I was taking care of all these kids. And I remember God speaking to me and telling me, you know what, Samara, you're exactly where I want you to be. Your children are your ministry. They're your first ministry. Your house is your first ministry. Like, you don't get it confused thinking that because you're not as active as you were in praise and worship and you're not as active as you were in the youth group that you used to work, and you're not as active in all the other ministries, you are tending to the flock that I want you to tend to. Like, this is the time that I have separated for you. And I remember that, like, God telling me, make the best of this time. And it was still hard. Like, even knowing that that's like what God had for me, when you guys were little, sometimes it was hard. It was because I was like, hey, I can't do everything the way I wanted to do it. But at the same time, like, I loved everything. Like, I was living my dream come true of my family. But I wanted to, like, be active. There was so much more that I expected from myself. There were so many more like challenges that I still hadn't overcome. And I was like, but I already wanted to be doing this that I've always like put off because of my fears. And now that I was finally like getting the courage to step into that, all of a sudden it's like as if I went back again. And now I'm like completely like farther away and it's going to take time for me to warm up to it again, and just what always encouraged me was like, hey, like, try to discern the seasons that God is placing you in, and don't take it for granted because life passes so fast. Today, I'm speaking from a perspective of a mother that has adults. Like, I have no more babies. I have no more children in the house. Our house is a house of adults. Yeah.
And it's definitely a different season, one that we're still all
we're trying to learn how to surf this whole
season,
parent and adult children under the same roof.
It's a rough patch.
Yeah,
sometimes.
sometimes it's a lot of head bumping because, like I said, we're very, all of us have opinions. We're all very opinionated, and we all see things from different perspectives. So it's not, sometimes to get us all to align, it's frustrating to us as parents, but I am sure it's frustrating to them because they're no longer kids anymore where you can just say, sit still, don't do anything. Like, they don't sit still anymore. They can actually get up and walk out like they're adults. Like, you can't just tell them, go to your room. Like, it doesn't work in the dynamic of when your kids are adults anymore.
Yeah.
So it's a challenge that we're still trying to navigate, and hopefully...
And we will.
Yeah, once we're equipped completely for that, we'll try to help everybody else.
And it is something that is beautiful because I even said, I was like, I'm in a season where I thought that what a woman should do is be married young and have kids young. And that's just what a woman's calling is. Honestly, I thought a woman's calling was to be a mother and a wife, and that was it. And becoming an adult woman at 26 and not being married yet and still figuring out that season of life, I thought that I was a failure as a woman because I would look at my mom, and my mom had the idealistic Christian woman life, and then I would look at my life and I'm like, God, what did I do for you to hate me? Like, what did I do? I was like, genuinely, I was like, why don't you want to give me my husband? Why? I was like, because I have this dream and this desire to be a mom and to do, and I've watched my mom my whole life do these things, and I want that as well. But then I had a moment where I realized that in this season that I was living as a woman, God was blessing me. He was blessing me to have time with my family that I wouldn't have gotten to have if I was already married. Yeah. To spend the last few years of, my sister and my brother being young and kids. If I had a kid, how was I going to be that close with them? I wouldn't be able to. And to get to be near my parents and to get to learn from them, to have relationships where we can actually talk about the struggles of adulthood and ministry and church, I probably wouldn't have that opportunity like I do now. And I feel like I value family so much because I've gone to live my adulthood with my family, which is something different. Mm-hmm. And it's beautiful in its own right. And it's healing to realize that you're not being punished. There's going to be a discussion on that I'm going to be talking about to single adult women who feel like God is ignoring them, God is rejecting them. Don't worry, we're going to be talking about this topic as well. But God is not rejecting you. No. It's a blessing to get to serve your parents and to be with your parents. The Bible even says that if you honor your father and mother, the days of your life is prolonged. These years that I've gone to spend with my parents and serving them and dealing with them and learning with them and them pouring into my life, I know when I finally get that new season of being a wife, I'm going to be more blessed. I'm going to be more blessed with experience that I probably wouldn't have if I was a 20-year-old woman getting married. Now my parents get to present a 26-year-old woman whose head is a little bit more stable.
I was actually about to crack a joke when you said that. God says that when you honor your father and your mother, your life is prolonged. And I'm sure it feels like an eternity living with us as an adult. So your life feels like it is definitely prolonged.
There's some moments where I'm like, God, really? Really? We're doing this again?
Yeah.
But it's beautiful because
it is.
It's something so amazing. Like, I get to me and my mom always bumped heads growing up because we're
We're both
strong.
Very opinionated and strong women.
Even when I was in my mother's womb, I was supposed to be born in July. I came out in May. So I have always made the joke that I've come to really test her limits. And
she has. She's done a good job at it.
And to mold her and to, we bump heads a lot. Now, though, we have a relationship that we never got to have.
Yeah.
I've gotten to really see how I have a mom that I can talk to who respects me as an individual. And even when she doesn't agree with me, you do really good at, still honoring my individuality. Mm-hmm. And that's the only advice that I would give to moms whose daughters are strong-headed.
Yeah, that's the one thing that I always
respect
ask
their individuality.
God, help me to navigate the understanding that my kids are no longer children. Because, yes, I want them to continue respecting me as their parent. Yeah. But now it's completely different. The dynamic changes completely. Like I said, I can't tell you go to your room or tell you, you know what?
I'm already there.
That's it. I'm taking your car away from you. You're not going to work. Like that's just not going to work, you know? So it changed. It changed. And that's what I always ask God. I'm like, God, the things that I don't agree on, even though, and you know that I will communicate what I don't like, because I think it's my place
to say something
as a parent to communicate. But I won't sit there and fight with you over it. We're not going to arm wrestle over it. We're not going to get into this big thing, because at the end of the day, there's things that it's no longer my lesson to teach. Mm-hmm. There comes a point, that's the thing that that I've been learning from God. There's lessons that I did my part. And there's things now that it's kind of like, Jesus, take the wheel, literally. It's not my lesson to teach anymore.
Yeah. That's beautiful. And, Mom, I'm very grateful for the mom that God gave me. You didn't know what it meant to be a mom, obviously.
Obviously.
But you've done a really great job.
Thank you.
You were 18 years old. People always thought you were my older sister. But you
Not so much anymore.
No. You always had the strength of what it took to be my mom. And I know that I wouldn't be even a quarter of the person that I am today if it wasn't for the pioneer woman that you are, for forging a way, for going before, for setting the groundwork so that when it was time for me to run the race, I already knew the miles. Mm-hmm. I already knew where to go, because you already went before me. And we're thankful to your mom who started the race, basically.
Yeah.
She passed the baton to you, and now you're passing it on to us. And one day we're going to get to pass it on to our children.
There's one thing I want to say. The importance of passing that baton, the importance of preparing the next generation, the importance of sharing with them, the laws of the Lord and the ways of God. Because a generation could be lost if you don't share it.
If you don't do your part and break the curses that come before you.
Yes, our part has to be there. We have to share it. We have to communicate.
Yeah.
We're seeing a lot of parents that aren't knowing how to be parents, that they want to be their kids' friends.
Especially during this season,
Yeah, they want to be their kids' friends. They want to be cool. But then at the same time, they're not, passing on the discipline and the things that need to come. So then when these people grow up and they face a difficulty, they can't understand a God that said no. They can't understand a God that, sometimes it feels like God is disciplining you. And then they struggle. They really struggle, because to them that is something foreign. That's something that they can't recognize as God's work and God's protection over them.
Taking care of them and teaching them.
Yeah, because when we say no and we set certain, limits, that's our protection over our children, in the same way God protects us in that same way. So it's important for us to teach the laws of the Lord, to establish, limits to all of that, or else we won't be able to prepare a next generation coming up.
It's true. It is very true. And that is the most important part of being a mom. It is. It's not just to have kids to dress up and to take and to be in a competition of who's the best mom. No. It's to raise. You always said, I did not raise kids for myself. I raised kids for them to be good citizens, for them to be people that are going to be blessing the generation they're in. And I love the fact that you were always like that. You never really raised us to just only think about ourselves.
No.
We've always thought about other people, and we've always prioritized helping other people. And that just comes from the example of you guys.
You guys, on so many occasions, you saw we would be struggling with something, or we would have our own regular conflicts, and we would say, you know what, time out, put this argument on hold. We need to go and help somebody else, because they had just called and they were at a breaking point, and we had to go and help other people. And then we'd be like, you know what, we'll come back to this argument. And with that, we did fall into the category of sometimes always pushing under the rug, because when you'd come back from helping other people, you'd see other people's issues were actually worse than the dumb things that you were arguing about. We would not confront the problems, which ends up being a problem down the road if you're not confronting and actually communicating and talking. But it's funny where you see where, things stemmed from. It always stemmed from wanting to help someone else.
Yeah. And with all of that being said, being a pioneer woman is being someone who is willing to go forward, someone who's willing to pay the price for their family, whatever that season is. They're willing to say no to the things that they want to say yes to, and yes to the things that sometimes they don't want to accept. It's having the courage to do what God asks you for your family. And for everyone here this Mother's Day, I want you to take the time to reflect and remember the pioneer woman in your life. The one who started that race, who started running before you, and who is passing the baton to you so that you can keep running. Remember that to honor them, to respect them, to let them guide you and teach you in the moments that you don't still know what to do. Because every time we promote to a new level, your mom was already there. She already passed that. And so why invent the wheel when she can give you the instructions to do it? Honor them in your life, and that we may continue to be strong women and raise strong women for the kingdom of God. Remember that you are fearfully and wonderfully made, and God has a purpose for you. Thank you guys for being here with me.
Thank you for having us.
I love you guys.
I'm Brianna. Just because she talks.
We both talk. Just go back to the butt.
Yep. That's how we were funnier. Go back to the butt.
Come here. I love you guys. Squeeze.